afternoon. My name is Joan Sherin Lange.
Where did you get the name Joan? Was that your mother's name?
No, it wasn't. As a matter of fact, I don't know the answer to that question.
All right. Okay. I was wondering if Joan, let me retrace, because I was going to ask you a question about your nicknames, and you told me you didn't have a nickname growing up, so you were known just simply as Joan. That's easy. There's no confusion there. We're here in Westbury. How long have you been in Westbury?
42 years.
That's longer than Brentwood.
True.
Yeah.
Very true.
42 years here in Westbury. How come you happened to choose Westbury? I mean, we're in Westbury now, but how come you happened to choose Westbury as your place of residence?
It was what we could afford when we were married.
Okay.
I wanted a home that looked a little bit like New England. And most of the very beautiful homes on Long Island were all alike. And so this was an old neighborhood. And
as we're talking, you're helping me remember, you used to be a neighbor of Ray Shirley and Marion Raywood.
Directly behind us.
Is that right? Now, when you say behind us, you're referring to
my husband, myself,
husband?
and my 3 girls.
Okay, tell me, your husband is deceased, is he, or are you separated?
He turned me in for a young fun thing.
Okay, so how long were you married to him?
26 years.
Okay, and for the sake of your daughters, you have daughters?
3 daughters, yes.
For the sake of your daughters, I would like to ask you about your husband a little bit, and if you could tell me. What's his name and what did he do? And
his name is Fred Lange, and he's an electrical engineer, and he has his own company. And he's a native Long Islander. He is from Manhasset.
And how long were you together?
26 years.
Okay. And at that point, you stayed and he left.
Correct.
And your daughters?
He got the boat and I got the house.
Okay. All right.
We were sailors.
And at that point, somewhere along the line, Ray Shirley and Marion Raywood had moved to Dix Hills. I know they left Westbury and eventually moved to Hawaii.
Yes.
Where I believe he found a whole new other passion, which was in theater and summer stock, and she reformed the state education
I'm sure.
In the state of Hawaii. But I'm not here to talk about them. The reason I did that little segue is because you come from a family of real educators, and talk about passion and commitment. Your dad is a legend. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your dad, and then we'll get back to talking about the girls. Tell me about your dad.
It probably coincides with the story of how I came to Brentwood. I graduated from Bridgewater State College in 1963, and at the time my dad was Commissioner of Education in Massachusetts. And I wanted to get a job in a place where no one knew my last name. In retrospect, that's probably not the wisest decision I've ever made. I'm sure I would have been superintendent of schools or commissioner in New York far sooner had I taken a different route.
But you didn't want to ride on his coattails.
I did not.
No.
And Brentwood was the only place where no one recognized my last name.
Okay. And so with that background and that role model, which had to be a tough act to follow, though, for you. Did you ever find that it was like the sons and daughters of some of the country's stars of movies and performing arts? It's a hard thing to live up to when you have somebody else in the family that has created all of this celebrity about themselves. You want to come out from behind the shadow, sort of, and you did that in Brentwood. You charted your own course.
That's true, but I never for a millisecond regretted being the daughter of Owen Burns Kiernan. He was an amazing man. Grew up in poverty. His dad was a shoemaker, and they didn't really have very much. His mom died when he was 7 years old, and so he was also an Irish storyteller, so very, very gregarious. But no, I never ever once regretted being his daughter or was intimidated in any way. I would only love to, hold the coattails if I could. As a matter of fact, in 1987, I was given a wonderful opportunity. My dad was on the National Horatio Alger Scholarship Board, and because my mom was sick with Parkinson's disease, she couldn't travel with him. So my dad asked if I would come to all of the events, and that's how I was introduced to Horatio Alger. And as you probably know, I'm the Northeast Field Director now for
I did not know that, Joan.
It's quite an honor. It's quite an honor.
Wonderful.
And it's the largest needs-based scholarship in the country, probably in the world, I'm sure. But
how do you choose the recipients for something like
ACT does the preliminary screening, and
that? Tell me what ACT is.
The accreditation for colleges in the United States, and we were associated with the College Board, and we go back and forth. But they always do the preliminary screening, and they have a point system, and you're awarded points for poverty, for adversity, for community service, and for academic scholarship.
Do individuals, school districts, or groups apply to it?
Yes, individuals apply.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
As a matter of fact, it was such an honor for me because last year Brentwood had its first national scholarship. And the national scholarship is $20,000. Many of these colleges and universities in the United States match that. And if there's any point at which the student cannot continue, the Horatio Alger members pledge to support the students. It's an amazing, amazing scholarship. Plus, they're brought into Washington, D.C. in the spring for a week. And they're given an opportunity to meet absolutely phenomenal people, from the President of the United States to the Supreme Court justices, and they're in the Supreme Court. It's just, I feel like Cinderella when I go there.
So tell me about last year's experience with Brentwood. Who was it, or what was it that this district got the?
Yes, because I was in Brentwood, I was upset, mildly upset that we had never had a scholar, because I can't think of anything more of a match than children who overcome adversity. Their poverty levels are just what we need for Horatio Alger, and the stories that our children have to tell. And so I pressed Wayne Abenis, the coordinator of guidance, and he went out, and Anthony Jimenez and one of the other counselors did a fabulous job, because the personal essay is what really gets a lot of points, and they work very, very hard with the students, and we have our first national scholar.
How many applicants were there last year?
I knew you were going to ask me that question, and I can't remember.
It's okay.
It's a huge,
okay. Oh, it
huge
was a
number.
large number.
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Okay.
yes. And we also had a state winner. Now, the state winners don't go to Washington, and they're only given $5,000. But nonetheless, that's A, a lot of money, and B, quite an honor.
Yes, it is.
So,
Oh, it's terrific. Oh, what a good story that is. We started talking before about the fact that we are conducting this interview here in your home in Westbury, and we were beginning to talk about your three daughters, and I would like to get back to that and ask you to tell me about the three of them. What are their names? What are they doing? How are they different? Something about their personalities or their qualities or their talents that you have observed.
they're all very, very different. I'm sure you know the story. When I married Fred, we were married in the summer, and actually in June. And probably 5 days after we were married. We were sort of halfway through our honeymoon. We had done a sailing trip for the first part, and the second part we were going to go up and stay on Cape Cod, where my parents live. And Fred's daughter's ex-wife, the mother of my girls, felt in the need of a European vacation. And so she brought them to the back door and said, "They're all yours." And therein lies the story of how I had an instant family 5 days after I was married.
And
So they
three
were
girls
3,
were,
7, and 9 at the time.
and all 3 girls were children of his previous
Yes,
marriage.
yes.
Remarkable story. I did not know that,
Yes.
Joan. Okay. What are they doing now? Where are
My oldest daughter is an executive secretary for a marine company on the island. She has a 13-year-old daughter.
they? What's her name?
My daughter, or my granddaughter.
Your daughter's
My daughter's name is Bonnie. It's actually Elizabeth, but
Okay.
always called her Bonnie.
Okay.
I never could understand why we didn't name her Bonnie, but I wasn't in the picture then, so no one asked.
Yes.
And she has a 13-year-old daughter who is doing amazingly well. First chair in viola. She plays soccer. She's an all-A student. Just so proud of her. And then Carolyn, my middle daughter, is a teacher of home and careers and art in Jericho.
Awesome.
And she has 3 boys. Gavin is the oldest, and he's in his second year at Geneseo. He was in pre-med, but he's now changed his mind. He thinks he doesn't want pre-med, so we're kind of in the middle. Probably business would be my guess. And he has twin brothers who are seniors in high school. And the cards are still out, so we're not sure, but definitely music and technology in the future for both of them. And her husband is in the computer field.
Okay. Do you have much contact? Do you see?
Oh,
them
absolutely.
Oh, you
absolutely, yes.
do. Now you
Yes,
just
I'm
came
very,
back.
Very, very
You
fortunate.
just came back, so
I did.
Was that a family trip?
No, I
It
went by
wasn't.
myself. But Martin Luther King holiday, we're all going to Jiminy Peak. Please let it snow before then.
Oh.
So all the grandchildren, except for one. My youngest daughter, Stacy, married a man, much like Mom, who had 2 children. And Vincent is 23 now, and he's in the Navy and stationed in San Diego. And his brother, Joseph, is still at home. He's 21. He's a Taekwondo instructor. And they adopted a baby from Guatemala. So she's turning 6 on January 13th.
Oh, congratulations. That's wonderful.
So I have 7 grandchildren.
Where were you born and when were you born, Joan?
I was born in Cape Cod in Sandwich, Massachusetts. And in 1941, 63 is when I came to Brentwood, 1941.
Okay, 41. Do you have what sometimes our memories of those early years are obscured by the fact that we can't remember if we just have seen pictures of it or if we were actually there, but do you have some early memories that you can share with us?
Oh, I have wonderful memories, chiefly because of my dad.
Yes.
We spent many, way too many to even put a number, in Sandwich, Massachusetts at the Daniel Webster Inn, where all family celebrations were held.
Is it still there?
It's still there. It absolutely is. And until 2 years ago, Dad claimed to be the oldest patron of the Daniel Webster Inn. And of course, everybody made a huge fuss every time he arrived.
Oh, isn't that wonderful? Now your dad recently passed
He
away.
did. It'll be 2 years in January. One month before his 96th birthday. But we had his 95th celebration at the Daniel Webster with all the family.
Wonderful?
Yes.
Wonderful. We're talking a lot about your dad, but I'm wondering, what was your mom like?
Oh, she was the wind behind the wings.
Yes.
Typical English lady. Very, 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 very classy. Very quiet. As gregarious as my dad was, is how reserved my mom was.
Well, I might say the apple hasn't fallen far from the tree.
Thank you.
Where in England was she from?
Her parents were born in London.
I see.
But she was born here.
She was born here.
Yes.
Have you have visited?
I have,
her
and
home?
I actually went to get their birth certificates. That was my first trip to London.
Okay. And what about your dad's home turf? Was he born in this country
He
too?
was born in
Massachusetts?
Massachusetts, yes.
And were his parents born in Massachusetts?
His dad was born in New York City.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. What was the background or the vocations, I should say, of on your father's side of the family before your dad went to school and became the acknowledged person in his own field?
No.
What did his parents do? What did his father do?
Well, his mom was a stay-at-home mom, but as I mentioned before, she died when he was 7.
Oh,
So the 2 boys, my Uncle Vincent and was 2 years older than Dad. They were 9 and 7. And so they grew up in a motherless home. And they tell quite the stories about whose turn it was to boil the potatoes and whose turn it was to take the coal and put it on the stove. And they had great stories. Unfortunately, my grandfather died when I was 3, and I don't have very many memories, except the stories that Dad would tell.
your daughters have memories of your father, however.
Oh, absolutely wonderful memories.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
That's so good.
Right. And even my my grandchildren have memories of great grandfather.
Oh, wonderful. Your mom was a stay-at-home mom.
Yes. Although Dad will tell you the story if you were here that she was a principal, just like Dad, and she had taught for him, and
Is that how they met?
yes. Well, no, they knew each other at the Bridgewater State College, but she taught in his school and then left and became a principal in toward the Boston area. And then he asked her to marry him and informed her that I guess it was typical in those days that she was not going to work because it wouldn't be right for the principal to have a teacher and be married to the teacher. So Mom got to stay at home.
Okay. What was her particular talent or ability? Did she enjoy doing something when she had spare time, which was not too often, I'm sure?
It wasn't. She was a very accomplished woman, especially we used to always talk about when we discovered that our mother had a brain. It's terrible. I'm sorry, Mom. She's up in heaven listening to this. But the traditional family dinner was always tell Dad what you did at school. And then Mother never said anything. And it wasn't until we were probably in college before we engaged her in any kind of intellectual discussion. My father and I used to have heated discussions at the dinner table, and Mom would very quietly and graciously serve the meal and listen politely, but she never said anything. So, but she was very, very bright, very well-read, very accomplished. Also, interestingly, she had a beautiful voice. And Dad was a musician. He played the piano.
Well,
Much to my annoyance, he played by ear. And I cannot play by ear, which is so frustrating.
But you play.
I do. I read music.
But there's the music in the family. I mean,
definitely.
It
My
is.
brother's a saxophone player. My sister's a violin player. We had an organ in one room and a piano in another room. And,
You must have some wonderful memories growing up.
Fabulous. I am terribly blessed.
Wow. Is there, I know families frequently have, when they get together on an annual basis, let's say, or more than that, there is generally a tale or a family story that gets told and retold, and there's a lot of laughter associated with it, or there's a lot of conversation that generates. Is there any story like that you comes to mind?
Oh, there is one that unfortunately I can't do it justice, but when Dad and Mom were first married, and Dad was principal of the high school and also the basketball coach. And I might add, the winning basketball coach, which in those days was very, very important. And, interestingly, a political means to becoming superintendent and things beyond superintendencies. And when they were first married, one of the teachers asked Dad and Mom to come to dinner. And as I told you, my dad is a non-stop talker, a pocket full of stories and delightful stories. You would be crying by this time in the middle of the story. But he would tell the story about the home and careers teacher who invited them to dinner. And the dinner was okay. It wasn't spectacular, which one would assume if you were a home and careers teacher. And that's not what they called them then, but I can't even remember. Was it
home economics?
Home economics, yeah. Was it? But anyway, they got to the dessert, and Dad said it was a very nice-looking dessert. And it had a meringue to it, and ice cream, and some kind of sauce. And in addition to being an Irish storyteller, he was also a dessert eater. So he put his fork in and discovered that the fork wouldn't move. So he couldn't figure out exactly what to do, so he kind of, continuing his Irish stories of well-renowned, and would wiggle the fork and wiggle the fork. Finally managed to cut through it and get a bite and put it in his mouth, and then discovered that his teeth were locked shut. He could not continue to talk. He couldn't open his mouth. I mean, that's the story that but to hear my dad tell it was just priceless. You really, seriously, we would cry every time. Dad, please tell us the meringue story. Please tell us the meringue story.
That's great.
That's my favorite.
Oh, yes. Were you an only child?
No, I have a brother and sister.
Tell me about that.
I'm the oldest, and my sister is the middle. Poor thing. And my brother is the heir to the family fortune and the prince. And
What's your sister's name?
Nancy.
And where does she live?
She lives in Denver, Colorado.
And what does she do in Denver?
She is contemplating retirement at the moment. She was the dean of school of nursing at the University of Colorado. And she's in the medical side. And my brother is the youngest, John, and he is an attorney. He was in the district attorney's office. But one of my favorite headlines of the Boston Globe was "Mob Gets Kiernan." And the mob was a reference to John has 7 children. So he had to leave the DA's office because they just don't pay.
Yeah.
And he went into his own
private practice.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so he has 7 children, lives in Milton where I grew up.
And is still practicing.
He's definitely. He claims he'll be practicing until he's 900. He gets very, very upset with the fact that we are so lucky to have pensions.
Yeah.
We really,
yes,
really are.
That's true.
My brother said there's no such thing in the private world as a pension.
That's correct. Is there something that you got out of your family experience that you might consider an important lesson, that a takeaway from growing up in your family with your parents, with your brother and sister, that you left with? You've said you are blessed.
I am. Probably my dad, as I mentioned before, was the Commissioner of Education. He was the 13th commissioner in Massachusetts. And the first commissioner was Horace Mann. And he would sprinkle Horace Mann stories on our cereal every morning. But the best and the one that really motivated me was be afraid to die until you have won a victory for humankind. And I think that's been a guiding path for me, which is probably why I couldn't retire or why I retired 5 times.
Wow, yeah. That I'm going to take with me now. Thank you.
If there is anything frustrating about retirement, it is the lack of purpose and the ability to say, I am doing something for humankind.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Is there a person or are there people besides your immediate nuclear family that were adult influences in your early formative years? were there other adults that were important to you?
Other than my family, probably teachers.
Mm.
And interestingly, I think cognitive dissonance affects us more than we realize. And some of the models were negative models. Some of the things that influenced my ability to teach, if I had any ability. Although sometimes I want to go back and say to my students, come back, I've learned so much, I want to do it all over again. But some of the models I had were less than what I would consider what we'd want for our students.
That you'd see it and you'd say to yourself, I could do better than that.
Right, yeah. And probably the cruelty that existed in some, the academicians who would look down their long noses and laugh at student errors. I hope I have never, ever laughed at a student. I pray that I have never. Because that should not get you entrance into heaven, if you have.
Was there a person besides your dad? And I suspect that that's a foolish question, because it would seem obvious to me that with a mother who was in education and a father who was certainly immersed in public education, that those were the career influences that got to you.
Yes.
Yeah. And this is public. You did not have a private school experience, did you, as a student?
No, I did not. Mm-hmm. No. As a matter of fact, once in Dad's career, he was superintendent of schools in Milton, where I grew up. And there was a point in his career where he was invited to come down to New York, Long Island, to kind of I think it's a regional at that time, Locust Valley, Bayville, that whole area. And Dad was not as impressed with the schools at that time as he was with the Milton schools. And he said something to the effect, I'm not sure where my children would go to school. And their response to him was, well, of course they would go to Friends Academy. And my dad was horrified. How could the superintendent of schools in public education send a child or children to private schools? That was like, oh my glory. So that was the end of that job. And then instead he took the commissionership in Massachusetts, the Commonwealth.
Great story. You mentioned some teachers that had influenced you. Tell me about one of them.
Rose DePoyen. And I have a lot of regrets, small regrets, yes. But they have mostly to do with, I wish I had written a letter. I wish I had told somebody how important the person was to me. And Rose DePoyen is one. She recently died. She was an algebra teacher in Milton, Massachusetts, Milton High School. A phenomenal teacher, phenomenal. As was Virginia Yoki at Bridgewater State College, as was Gertrude Miller, who was a guidance counselor in Milton High School. There were so many that I wish that I had the opportunity to reach out and say, Thelma Bell Foster, you made a difference in my life.
I think that's probably, as educators, why we appreciate it when we hear from students.
Oh, that's the greatest, isn't that the greatest compliment?
I used to call them paydays.
I was like, oh, wow.
That's why you're there.
I know.
Yeah. Did you have, in your own pastime, after school, did you have a favorite game that you played when you were growing up?
When I was growing up?
Yeah.
I was an athlete of sorts.
You were an athlete?
Volleyball, basketball.
Okay.
I was a swimmer.
Ah, okay. And again, your dad also was an athlete.
Oh, definitely.
Big time.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
Minor league baseball player.
What were the I would say one of the kind of gifts, or is there a particular gift that you remember receiving from a student at some point during your teaching days?
I think probably the words. I don't think that there were any greater. When I went back to Brentwood this time, the compliments that former students who are now teachers of Brentwood to welcome me back and to say to me, "You were the best English teacher I ever had." What could be greater than that? That it's just, there is nothing better than that. I was in Penn Station. I went in to see Alvin Ailey last week and ran into a former student who's a teacher in Iceland now. And she introduced me to her family as the best English teacher she'd ever had. I was like, oh, what a Christmas present.
Only someone from Brentwood could know what you mean when you would say to somebody, I just had a Brentwood experience. When you visit some other part of the world or some other part of the country, and in an unplanned way, somebody is there who turns out to have been a former student or from Brentwood and tells you the story or pays you the compliment.
Right.
Those are the best, and they happen all too frequently.
Absolutely. I'm sure you know that when in one of my stints as an assistant superintendent, I was in William Floyd, and the deputy superintendent at that time he's now superintendent, Paul Casciano, one of my students from Brentwood. So his office was right next to me, and he is so wonderful and was so paid such deference to me because I was his teacher.
Yes. Can you walk us through? You mentioned that particular stint, but walk us through your career because it has been multifaceted and quite varied.
Indeed.
What about school? When you started school, walk us through the schools you attended and then how you came to Brentwood, and we'll talk about your career. But I'd like to hear about your own education. Where did you go to school from the very beginning, and where did you do your graduate work, et cetera, et cetera?
I knew I wanted to be a teacher from the very, very, very beginning. That was never a question. I was going to be the educator in the family and follow in Dad and Mom's footsteps. And I went up to Middlebury because I wanted to ski. It's a terrible reason to pick a school, but and be a language major. I thought that would be the route. And I discovered that in order to be a teacher, you would have to spend an additional year. You couldn't graduate and be a teacher and go to Middlebury in those days. And so I said, well, that's not a good idea. And so then I applied to Bridgewater State College and went there. And after graduation, I was going directly to graduate school. And my parents really thought that experience would be a wonderful teacher. I was engaged at the time to be married, and the engagement broke up. And because it broke up, my plans for graduate school also went awry. So I, much to my parents, they were aghast that I didn't have a plan. But I graduated, and they had given me a gift of a trip to Europe, a bicycle trip through Ireland, England and Ireland. And I didn't have a place to work when I left on my trip. And just before I left, I did get a call from Brentwood, New York. They had seen my application, and Fred Rewa actually gave a call to Milton, Massachusetts, and asked if I would be interested in coming down. I said yes. And he said, what are you certified in? And he said, are you certified in New York? And I said, no, I'm from Massachusetts. Certified in Massachusetts, but he said, I'm sorry, we're not interested. I said, oh, okay, thank you very much. I wasn't concerned at all. I'd had wonderful interviews in Bedford Hills and Chappaqua, places like that. But because they knew my dad, I wanted to go someplace that didn't know me. So anyway, I went to Europe, and while I was there, a man by the name of Charlie Swenson called my mother because he had seen, this is embarrassing to tell the story, he had seen my letter of application and liked my handwriting. So I am in Brentwood because Charlie Swenson loved my handwriting. So he called my mom, and my mom was thrilled, and of course said, absolutely, when she returns, I will drive her down, which she did. We came and looked around, and I had an interview in North Junior High School and met with Charlie Swenson and John Maroka, and they hired me on the spot. And I said, but a man by the name of Fred Weaver said I couldn't come here. I don't know how it was, but the high school apparently operated one way and North Junior High School operated another. So in 1963, I came to North Junior High School. And at the time, I was doing graduate work in linguistics. And I don't know if you remember, but there was quite a project at North Junior High School with the Marines in linguistics, Postman and Marine. And so I was doing some work with them and continuing my graduate work at Harvard. And then when I moved down here full time.
I can only tell you, Joan, that when I came to Brentwood in '63, Jerome Bruner was the big name and throughout the district, and I did not know about the efforts being made in North. What happened with that program, the linguistics program?
It went the way of many of the linguistic programs that were.
Well, if it was funded and then the funding ran out, then that would have been the end of it.
And it sort of morphed, and my memory is rather poor on this, but I went from the linguistic project to the Ford Foundation project, and kind of became involved then. I remember, flying back and forth on weekends to come down and meet with all the Ford Foundation people, and
Okay.
And then I came, definitely moved permanently and went back to the certification piece and was asked if Harvard were an accredited graduate school by someone in personnel who should remain nameless. And it wasn't Camilla. So I had to go to Hofstra to become certified in the state of New York. And I took really interesting things like audio-visual something. I had no idea why I needed this to teach, but anyway, I did like Hofstra, and so I stayed and did my doctoral work there. And I received a fellowship to complete my doctorate and graduate from Hofstra.
And what was the subject of your doctorate?
I don't think you want to ask me that.
I'm very curious.
It was a study of harassment of female educators in the state of New York. I surveyed all of the female educators at that time, and basically looked at how many of us broke the ceiling, and if we did, why we did, and if we didn't, why we didn't.
Yes.
It was a fascinating study. I'm sure you know Charles Shakeshaft. She was my dissertation advisor and world-renowned for her work with discrimination and women's studies.
That was quite a trend breaker, I mean, at that time.
It really was.
You were way ahead of the curve.
Yes. And my first administrative job in Brentwood actually had to do with the fact that they didn't do very well on a civil rights audit. And they didn't have any female administrators in Central. And so
I can remember a photograph of you with the Central administrators, and you were the sole representative.
That's right.
Of your sex. There was no other women there.
Fred and I were married at the time, and I had a parotid gland tumor that had to be removed. Went into the hospital. And then it was not a serious, it was serious only in that there was a question whether it was benign or not, which thank the good Lord it was benign. But I came out of the hospital and knew that I had an interview with Frank Morrow and, oh help me, who was the other person? Frank Morrow and Ken Stublow at the Bonwood Inn. And they asked me, and I came down with this huge bandage on the side of my face. Do you know they never asked me what happened? I thought that was fascinating. Sitting in a bar stool in the Bonwood, because that was in those days, that's where we would go for any kind of social drink.
Yes.
And they never asked me. It was a huge, huge bandage.
That's
But I must have done all right because
strange.
I did take the job. And
Okay.
that's where my administrative career started.
And what year was that, June?
1971.
All right. So you really have been an administrator longer
Yes,
than you
then
were
I was a teacher.
a classroom
I
teacher.
was. I was.
What was the most, I want to come back to the earlier question in a moment, but about taking us through the steps to the various positions and hats that you've worn through the years. But I'll come back to it in a moment. As an administrator, what was one of the most difficult decisions you ever had to make?
This is probably not the answer you expected, but leaving Brentwood.
Is that a fact?
Mm-hmm.
And you left Brentwood to go?
Because I couldn't get the assistant superintendent's job.
I see.
For whatever reason.
Yes.
I wasn't tall enough or smart enough or smiling enough, or I called it the two syndrome, the TOO.
Okay.
I don't know, but I knew that I needed to leave if I was going to advance my career.
Okay.
So in 1992, I left Brentwood to become the assistant superintendent in Rockville Center.
That was where we were going with the other question. So you left Brentwood, you went to Rockville Center.
I did.
And you were there for?
4 years. 4 years. I had been 30 years in Brentwood. And most people think I retired from Brentwood at that point, but I didn't. I didn't.
Okay.
Because I come to Brentwood when I was young.
Rockville Center and Brentwood represent a contrast.
The exact opposite.
Yeah.
And as much as I learned in Brentwood about education and what good teaching is about, I also learned in Rockville Center. I mean, you name the adjective and its opposite exists either in Brentwood or Rockville Center. Large, small, wealthy, poor, diverse, non-diverse.
Yes.
It was an incredible experience for me. And wonderful people in both instances.
Mm-hmm.
The parents in Brentwood were so supportive and paid us such an honor by almost kowtowing to whatever we said. It would never occur to a Brentwood parent to argue with us in those days. And the opposite is true in Rockville Center, because they're all professionals. And unfortunately, most of the time, when you're a lawyer or a kingmaker, you know all about education and would argue constantly.
Yes.
And my favorite Rockville Center story was I spent an hour on the phone trying to explain to a parent the benefits of the gifted and talented programs that we had in Rockville Center. And this particular mother was not to be satisfied. And I finally said, out of pure frustration, well, how old is your child? Because they were considering moving here. And she said, oh, I don't have any children. She said, I'm just thinking in the future. I was like, oh, already she knew there was gifted and talented child in the wings. But
wow.
I don't know whether she ever moved to Rockville Center. But the districts were so different. But you know what? The children are all the same. Children are the same.
Yes.
And there are children who need us and children who don't need us. And I think I'm better with children who need us. And that's basically why I did the loop around after that.
Right. Well, and so after Rockville Center, then you left there after 4 years.
I did. I actually retired then. That was my first retirement.
Okay.
So I retired, and Fred and I were we had a very, very beautiful 48-foot Norseman. And we were going to take some wonderful sailing trips. But he fell in love with a beautiful young woman and left. So I didn't do well with retirement and the divorce.
What year would that have been now that you left Rockville Center? That was in 1997 that I left. 97, I think. Okay.
So.
And you didn't do well with retirement.
No,
you said
not
that
at
before.
all. Not at all.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was horrible.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of anything I liked about it.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine, Anna Hunniford, met me on a ferry going to Massachusetts, and she said, "What are you doing now?"
Yeah.
And she said, "You have to come over. You know, we have a spot for you." So I went and I did a year's interim there. Had a wonderful time. Very much like Rockland Center. Very wealthy.
What system was this now?
In Jericho.
Oh, in Jericho.
Yes,
That's where you
yes.
went.
So
Okay.
I went there for a year. And then knew then that I really like helping children overcome adversities.
Yes.
And I think I do better in a situation where the need is greater. They're so appreciative of us that whatever we do, they're so thankful.
Yes.
And it's not, I don't mean to in any way disparage my time in either Rockland Center or Jericho, but it's just, I felt more needed in William Floyd, where I went next. And I spent 4 years there and loved William Floyd, loved William Floyd. But at that time I said, you know what, I think it is time to retire.
And
so
then you were an assistant in William
yes,
Floyd.
assistant
before.
yes. So then I retired again.
What were you looking for at the time that you retired from William Floyd? What did you anticipate at your retirement at that juncture of your life?
But people talk a lot about how wonderful it is, that there's no stress, and that you have you don't know where the time goes. But I found my lack of purpose to be very, very frustrating. You can only clean so many closets, and although I would love to volunteer, I couldn't quite find what I needed to volunteer, and I'm horrible. My sister's in the medical field, and my brother's sort of in the medical field because of his law practice, and they're wonderful on that side, but I'm awful on that side. I guess I could go and volunteer at the reception desk, but don't put me in the hospital room, please.
Yes. Yeah.
So I wasn't good at that. So I couldn't find anything that would fill the day with something important.
But you bounced again.
So I did. I actually finished my gardening, and I had a beautiful garden that year. And October came around, and golf was on the wane. And a friend, Al Van Cott, who was superintendent of schools in ISIL, said, "Joan, I need an assistant for a couple of days." And I said, "Al, maybe 5 days a week." So I went back full time, and I did 4 years in ISIL.
My goodness. And when did that end?
And then, when did that end? 9 years ago, because I then went to, I retired again, and then a friend needed some help over in Hewlett-Woodmere. She had just become a new deputy superintendent, but she had never been in the central office. So she hired me as her coach. So I was a deputy superintendent coach for a year in Hewlett-Woodmere. And again, it was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful experience. If there's anything in this tape I need to say over and over again, it's that the teachers in Hewlett-Woodmere and Rockland Center and Jericho, I trust as phenomenal as ours are in William Floyd and Brentwood. The difference is that the job is different. It's a race, and some of us are gifted and allowed to run a fast race from the very beginning, and others of us don't. We need to take a little bit more time. And I've forgotten the name of the Boston University professor who used to talk about a bus, that education is like children on a bus. Some of them are in the driver's seat. Some of them are in the navigator's seat. Some of them are in the passenger seat. And some of them are hanging on for dear life as they go over every pothole and cobble in the entire world. And I like that image because all of them make it, but some of them have more difficulty making it than others.
Yes.
So after I was actually in Hewlett-Woodmere, and I got a call from Donna Jones, and she said, "I'm going to be superintendent in Brentwood." She said, "And I'm hearing that you worked in Brentwood." I said, indeed I did. She said, would you be interested in coming back? And I said, I would love to come back. And she said, well, the only thing I need is you have to give me 4 years. She said, I don't want to do an interim thing. I said, I could do 4 years. And so that's how I went back to Brentwood.
You are a living, breathing example of the old adage that when you're in a place, I'm talking now not about education, but in the corporate field,
right.
If you're in a job more than 18 months, you're not learning anything new.
That's right.
It's time to change.
That's right.
And you certainly have given life and breath to the notion that there is growth in change.
Yes.
And there is value in really locating periodically.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things that...
And you've worked in some very affluent school
yes.
districts, and you've worked in some very challenged school districts.
I learned that lesson from my dad. He would say, you have to have a game plan, and if you're going to be a change agent, you need a game plan, and it has to have an ending point. He said, because you can't be a change agent for a long period of time.
You need an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right, and once you accomplish the agenda, it's time to move on.
You mentioned this before, Joan, and it's out of sequence from my normal routine, but I want to ask you before I forget to ask you at all. You mentioned the importance of purpose. What was your purpose? You've said it, but I would like to hear you.
I don't think I've made it yet. That's what's bothering me about this retirement. Be afraid to die until you've won some victory for humankind. I think, is a
That's
purpose.
your purpose.
I think
that's it.
Right.
Okay. Well, then you did answer it, and you're consistent, so that's great. Did your family have, when you were growing up and while your dad was around, was there a family holiday that was the big holiday of the year that you celebrated every year? One in particular?
No, probably Christmas.
Yeah, okay.
Christmas.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering to go back to when you were probably a preteen or a teenager. The first time you ever were paid money to work, to do a job. Do you remember what it was?
I was a babysitter, a horrible babysitter.
Oh, okay, you're a babysitter. Okay.
And I babysat for the little girl across the street. And I remember being paid, although halfway through the evening she became violently ill. I called my mother and said, Mom, can you come and fix this?
Yes. Oh,
but I do remember getting paid for it, which didn't make any sense to me.
That definitely would be the downside of babysitting.
Right.
Yes.
My mom took over.
When you were in school, what were your favorite subjects? I think I know the answer to that, but I must ask you.
It's interesting because most people think my background is literature because I taught English. But my English background was on the linguistics side. And so I was really involved in the sciences. And my favorite science were the life sciences. I loved them. As a matter of fact, when I was contemplating going into administration and doing something different, I applied for a sabbatical. In the old days, we would have sabbaticals.
Yes.
And Maddie Dwyer was the chair of the sabbatical committee. And I wanted to have another master's. I wanted to go to Woods Hole to do a marine biology master's. And they kind of laughed at me and said, what would you do with another master's? Because in those days, whoever had 2 masters, now everybody has them. But they said no. But they had a good idea. They said, why don't you come to the elementary schools and help us teach English, teach children how to write. And so I said, well, that sounds like a great idea. And I got home that night and I said, what am I thinking? I don't know anything about elementary school. I know absolutely nothing about elementary school. So I called my mom, who was the smartest person beside my dad. Dad would like that comment, but she's very, very smart and people smart. And I said, Mom, I think I just made a mistake. I took a sabbatical and they're going to pay me to go to the elementary schools and teach teachers how to teach writing. And she said, well, that's wonderful. I said, but Mom, I don't know anything about elementary school children. And she said, that's all right. She said, what you have to do. And I said, I'm going to be teaching teachers. And they've been teaching elementary school, and I've never taught elementary school. This makes no sense to me. And she said, all you have to do is they'll be meeting with you after a long, hard day. And I forgot to tell you that Mom was in the elementary schools when she was the principal. She majored in English, but she was the elementary school principal. And she said, it's an exhausting day. And she said, you have to remember that. So when you have them for the seminars, what you have to do is serve them tea and bake them some cookies. So I said, well, that's good advice. So, I mean, you ask any elementary teacher in Brentwood, whoever took a course with me, and I said, well, that's a good idea. But what I didn't realize is there are 11 elementary schools in Brentwood. Do you know how many cookies that is if you're baking cookies for first grade teachers and second grade teachers and third grade teachers and fourth grade teachers? Oh, but it became a standard joke. Nobody would come to a seminar unless I baked cookies. They all remember my cookies. I don't know if they remember what I taught them. But
Wonderful. So then you decided at a certain point that, as we went over this before, we talked about it before, you left Brentwood after.
I did. I knew I couldn't go any further.
How many
What
years
I thought
was
a ladder. I'm not sure I would view it quite as a ladder anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I learned so much from the elementary teachers in Brentwood. If I know anything about teaching and learning today, I know it because of them. It's just the experiences that I've had reframed my thinking.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you left Brentwood, once again, you don't like the idea or the notion of retirement, so you didn't stay still for long.
No, I didn't.
You moved again, and what did you do next?
After Brentwood?
Yeah.
That's when I did the Rockwell Center. I did 4 years in Rockwell Center.
I beg your pardon.
Right.
You know what I was thinking, Joan? I know that you had shared with me that you have been doing some consulting since you now at this point.
Now I retired on August 3rd. I actually retired on July 30th. But I was representing Brentwood at a state education conference in Albany. And I was there until August 3rd. And on August 4th, I had a new hip. So talk about denial. Since that, I lasted about a month in the recuperation period, just trying to figure out how you go to physical therapy 3 times a week and all that. And then I started to get bored again. And right now I'm doing some work for the state education department. I'm doing the school quality reviews for schools that don't make the cut point. I asked if I could do Brentwood, but they said no because I was too prejudiced. That's true. I am very prejudiced for Brentwood.
Do you have, then or now, do you have a favorite season of the year?
No, I really don't. I don't like very hot.
Okay.
But I love summer.
Yes.
Because I love swimming and sailing.
Sure.
But I love winter because I'm a skier.
Sure. Okay. They say aromas can sometimes be a trigger to memory. Is there a food that triggers memory for you?
So many aromas do.
Mm-hmm.
Cloves. There used to be clove lifesavers. I spent my life looking for clove lifesavers. I love clove lifesavers. But I do love the smell of cloves and fires burning. That triggers so many New England memories.
Yes.
The smell of evergreens.
Yes. I know.
Say, how can you have a live tree now? Everybody has an artificial tree. I could never have an artificial tree.
I know that it's not a wise, health-wise, it's not a politically correct comment, but my grandfather smoked cigars.
Did he?
And I don't smoke cigars, but I enjoy the aroma of a cigar, only because he's there.
Right, of course.
That's it. But I'd like to ask the question because I know that we all have certain aromas, and at certain times of the year, might even be just the smell of dampness or the smell
Right,
of salt air
right.
or the
Oh,
smell
salt air. What could be better than that?
Yeah, exactly.
How could I have a sister? You asked about the differences,
Yeah.
between and among my three daughters. And I often think how different my sister and I are. She moved away from the East Coast. How could you leave the water? I mean, I know the Colorado Rockies are beautiful, but...
Yes, exactly. So did you ever get that second master's degree?
No, I didn't. I
You didn't?
did my sabbatical at North Elementary School, and from North Elementary, I did all
Okay.
of the elementary
But
schools.
you did your
and then
doctorate.
from there, I did. That's when they offered me the position of.
Okay.
Actually, I think at one point I was a middle school consultant, and I worked with English teachers, and then it kind of led to the coordinator of language arts.
Okay. I don't know if you can do this. Can you conjure up the total number of years that you have served as a public educator?
I can, because it's, well, if you do the math, I can. So much for Rose DePoyen, and my compliments to her algebra teaching skills. I did 30 years and then left, and then I did 12 years, 4 in Islip, 4 in William Floyd, and 4 in Brentwood, and then 1 in Hewlett Woodmere and 1 in Jericho.
So you're well into the 40s, 43, 44 years. Wow, impressive, quite impressive. Is there at this point something that you could point to that you could say, I wish I had been able to accomplish so-and-so, or I wish I had the resources or the time?
Yes, that's an easy question, and it's one that I have not given up on. I'm still active on the Long Island ASCD board, and I'm the historian. And one of the fights that I think we have got to continue is to help people understand that there is a 3-tier system in the state of New York. We have the haves, and we have the have-nots, and we have those in the middle. And the gross inequities that exist are just not fair. And they're not fair to the parents, and they're not fair to the students. And we have to continue to fight. So as long as I'm, able to and involved in the Horatio Algers of the world and the, Long Island ASCDs, that's an opportunity for me to continue that fight, because I haven't. Although I hope my voice is very, very strong, and I hope that I have brought some degree of pride to Brentwood by representing them outside. There is nothing that irritates me more when I meet someone and the person will say, "Oh, you work in Brentwood? How awful." And for the next 25 minutes, they have to listen to me lecture them about the wonders of Brentwood.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the questions that I would probably have asked you, but you seem to have answered it already, is what are the things that push your buttons, that make you angry?
That's one.
Right
that is
there.
one. I just don't understand it, because I do understand it. It's the fear of the unknown. People say to me, but there are gangs. There are gangs everywhere. There are probably gangs in Milton, Massachusetts, where I grew up, where there's not one speck of diversity. I'm sure that that's not an issue, and there are problems in every single community. They take slightly different forms.
Carmilla Christian is fond of saying, listen, if Jack the Ripper were still alive and he were taking a plane from Heathrow to Newark, New Jersey, they would say, the headline in Newsday would say, Jack the Ripper flies over Brentwood.
Exactly.
The media
they're
does
just
a job.
awful.
Yeah.
I thought for a time when Donna and Aurelia and myself were there, I saw a shift in some of the press, but I notice it's now back again too. I don't understand it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You because of your experiences in many other places and in Brentwood at different times, I was just wondering, Joan, if you, from your perspective, could see or say what accounts for the fact that in some ways Brentwood is the same as it's always been, and in other ways it's a very different place from Brentwood that it was in when you first arrived or when we started.
Sadly, and I tried for the last 4 years to do a lot of reflection about this. It's not the family it once was. And Brentwood's strength was in that it was a family. I still go, as you do, to many, many occasions, and I see fewer and fewer and fewer people who are devoted to the entire Brentwood community. And the trustees in the most recent Board of Education paid me tremendous compliments because they said, Joan, you are everywhere. But to me, that's what Brentwood is about. I love going to the basketball games. I love going to the football games or the lacrosse games. There isn't a finer music department this side of the Mississippi. I mean, what a privilege to be in the audience for the drama events. And a long, long history, Murray Burns, of wonderful to Ed Callahan. I mean, the whole history. You could pay $150 for a Broadway seat and not see as good a show as you would if you went to one in Brentwood. The science department that they have.
Did you, a moment ago, did you mean Ed Hannon? When you said Ed Callahan, or was
the drama coach now?
There was Ed Hannon and there was Cass Howard. And
right, when they were there.
Yeah,
but I think Ed Callahan is.
Oh, I don't know his name. Okay, I don't know.
I think he's doing the musicals now.
I see.
Just amazing productions, and
it's true.
What I missed most this year, from September to now, is not being. I'm hesitant to go back to the musical events and the sporting events and the marching band, and the science events, and of course the students. I mean, where else would you find students like those in Brentwood?
How would you finish the sentence Brentwood students are?
Amazing individuals who don't understand the word obstacle. There's not a hurdle you could place in front of a Brentwood student. They won't surmount it. I mean, they're phenomenal individuals.
And many of them, Joan, have become teachers.
I know.
In the district. They've come back.
I know.
Or another way of saying is they've never left.
Right.
They just stayed. And I hope that the perception that the notion of family that you referred to has changed, but because there are generations of Brentwood folks involved in the system, I would hope that the memory of that has not been extinguished.
I hope, and I hope it's just that right now in education we're facing insurmountable odds.
Exactly.
The students aren't, but we are. We need to fight very, very hard to protect Brentwood and to make sure that the monies are there for the students who will one day rule the universe.
Yes. And in some cases are.
They certainly are. They certainly are.
I don't want to get off the subject because we could spend the next half hour just talking about the success stories of our students, where they are and what they're doing. Was there ever a point in which you were involved in any of the professional organizations of the district? Were you ever involved in BTA or BIPSO or any of the other? I know you're involved on the state level and on the county level. Right. I just wondered whether there was any time in your life to do any of that.
So I was a delegate in the BTA, and but I was in the teaching ranks for such a short period of time.
Relatively speaking, yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Compared to my rather long career.
Yes.
And then I was in BIPSO, and the greatest honor they gave me was they nominated me for the Educator of the Year.
Isn't that wonderful?
I know.
Oh.
That was an incredible honor.
Have you ever been afraid to go to work?
No. Excuse me? I beg your pardon? No.
You know why I asked the question.
I thought you were going to ask, did something about, were you afraid to go to work because you were afraid of spreading the flu that you had and you should have stayed home in bed? But no. Absolutely never.
No, that's the button that you don't like to have to push that talks about yes.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Some of the beginning teachers
Absolutely
whose parents are afraid to have them go to Brentwood by themselves to teach a night course or something because they're so overwhelmed with the press, the media, the false characterization of the
community. We had
an
unfortunate occurrence. My first year of the 4-year return, and we had to evacuate the high school. And now the students wouldn't know me because I had been away for the 12 years. So there's no sense of history there, and they don't know who I am. I have a badge on, but they don't know me.
Right.
John, I can't tell you how phenomenal they were in this emergency. I'd say to the kids, move quickly, move out of the way, turn there. Yes, miss. Just so polite. And what can we do to help? Let me hold this door. The security guards talk about that incident because the superintendent happened to be away on that day. So there were no central administrators who could, come to the site. And I can't tell you, the teachers, of course, are always wonderful, but the students were so phenomenal and polite. You couldn't ask for more polite students.
Mm. What was the greatest source of the pride and accomplishment? Something that you were able to see instituted or accomplished that you could say you were a part of, or that you had your name attached to it, or your reputation was attached to it. Again, I'm thinking about your purpose, so as you define it, and I'm thinking to myself simultaneously, but you have done so many things that have met that criteria, and I just
I
wanted
hope
to.
so. I have. I used to have an old poster. It's probably in the garage somewhere. That was in my classroom from the very beginning, and it said, "Will it matter? Will I make a difference?" And I ask myself that all the time.
Yeah.
In your long career, did you make a difference? And if you did, how? And I think I did make a difference. And the how was because I worked with such incredibly wonderful people. One person can't do it.
No.
One person can be a change agent, but unless you have individuals who see the vision, you won't be able to accomplish, the goal.
Yeah. Do you remember what you were paid your first year in the Brentwood School District?
I want to say $6,300.
Okay.
Does that sound right? You and I came in the same year.
I came in '63 is when I came in.
Oh, okay.
So you came in before me.
No, I came in '63.
Oh, '63.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
What were you?
Okay. Well, I wasn't as high on the credits as you were at that time, because my first year was before taxes, $5,200.
Could have been 63.
Sure.
I do remember that I was the number one graduate from Bridgewater State College. That I was the highest paid. That's because I left Massachusetts and went to New York.
What was the most fun part of your final assignment, doing the job in Brentwood before you decided to leave for the second time? What was the most fun that you would have doing that?
The most fun.
By the way, I could also follow that up with another question. What didn't you enjoy, or what did you enjoy least of what were part of your job requirements or your assignment responsibilities?
Well, I never liked and was never any good at the discipline side.
Yeah.
I did superintendent's hearings.
Okay.
Those are very difficult for me because one of the haunting memories I have of my life here was when I call them the bad guys, broke in and tied me to my daughter's bed and whiplashed me, and it was just awful, awful, awful. And basically, my running alarm rang, and for some unknown reason they left after probably an hour of just pure torture. But the whole time that they were there were conflicting thoughts, obviously. One was, if I die, I should have told this person I love that person, or I should have done this for that person. But the other thought that raced through my mind considerably had to do with, where did we fail these young men? Because they were 4 men, and they were high on very serious drugs. And I kept thinking, where did we fail? And how many along the way did we miss? Why didn't a teacher turn these individuals around? So you asked before if I had accomplished anything. I hope so on the academic side, but more so, I hope so on the personal side. I hope I made a difference for a student sometime.
Yeah. That is a very, very scary story. I was unaware of it having happened, so it does make your life flash before your eyes and thinking
definitely did.
What's important. But the fun part of your job?
The fun part was always the student activities.
Yes.
Anytime I got to go to a night activity and get to see them perform, or go see them in the quiz bowls or the science Olympiads, or anything like that was fun for me.
We saw, or we witnessed, a lot of important historical events take place during the time that we served in the profession. From the 60s on, lots of things. Do you recall one in particular? One horrible or memorable?
Probably the assassination of John F. Kennedy. That was my first year. And I remember a student, God rest his soul, he lost his life in Vietnam, John Rosen, came running down the corridor and burst through the door and said, Miss Kiernan, the president's been shot. And to this day I regret my answer because I thought he was fooling around. And I said, John, it's time to sit down and do your work, or something to that effect. And then to learn that he was right.
Yeah. You didn't take him seriously.
No,
that was unthinkable.
Absolutely.
It was unthinkable. You couldn't imagine it. No. Well, clearly that affected you, and for you to mention it over all the other things that have happened both locally and nationally just says how it did affect you, how much it did affect you. What would you like? I think you've answered this too. If you could wave the proverbial magic wand with a sense of omnipotent power to make a couple of things happen in public education, not just in Brentwood, but everywhere, in addition to providing some kind of eliminating the inequity that exists in funding, is there anything else that you could point to that you say, boy, we need to do this? And you just mentioned a couple of things that might have a bearing on that, but none of us have that kind of power. None of us will ever be able to accomplish what we see is needed. But I just wanted to see if you could share with us what you see as a priority, something that...
Well, in addition to the equity line, I think we have to pay careful attention to the curricula in the schools. I think it's a up and down piece. We need rigor, we need relevancy,
Do we need so much testing?
No, but we need a tremendous amount of accountability. Pro-accountability. I think it's so important. And you know what? I wish somebody had held me accountable, and I wish that I had had an opportunity as a teacher to study the data and to say, where did I fail?
Yeah.
Look, I didn't teach inferences well. How can I do it better?
Yeah.
There is so much, such a glut of data, but we don't do very much with it.
Or it doesn't get shared with the people who need to see it.
Right. Don't be sharing it with state ed.
Yeah.
Share it with the teacher.
Exactly.
It would make a lot more sense.
Yes. Well, there are so many questions, and given a limited amount of time, I would like to ask you if you were to provide, and maybe you would do this anyway in your personal life, if you are to encounter somebody who is beginning a career in education, or perhaps was offered an opportunity to fill one of the roles that you filled, what kind of advice would you give somebody who is just beginning, who is going into a field? And many times teachers, if they stay, will stay for their entire professional life in the field. What do they need to know going in? What did your experience give you that you could share with somebody who's just going into the field?
Probably that the decision to go into the field is for the right reasons. I didn't mention in my long career, I also had several opportunities to teach at the collegiate level. And in one instance, I actually left, obviously at the end of the semester. But I was so disturbed because the students were, I don't know whether to say not smart or not committed to the academics. A spokesperson for the reading department, which I was in, asked me at the end of probably the third week, Dr. Lange, when are you going to tell us what it says in the book? We want you to explain what it says in the book. Well, to say that my mouth dropped open is an understatement. It's like, you want me to explain what it says? Why would I explain to you what the book says? The book does that. That's why I gave you that particular text. And I was very, very unhappy. You were not in this particular college or university, which should remain nameless. You were not allowed to give C's. I said, well, what if a student didn't earn a B or an A? If you're saying that there are only 2 grades, you're minimizing the importance of real academic work. So I would say that if you are going to go into education, you really have to be committed to the academic side. And in addition, of course, you have to love children. You have to love them. If you don't, please, please, please choose another profession. And if you're not enthusiastic about spending hours and hours and hours, days and days and days, I mean, this education is truly a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour day. We should never be off. You know what? If a student needs me, here's my cell phone. Here's my card. Call me anytime. Don't worry about that. And if you don't see education that way, then that's not the field for you.
And if you're going into teaching because you want to be a writer and you feel you can write and also teach at the same time, you're making a terrible mistake.
Right.
If you want to write, write.
Right, exactly. If you want to sell shoes in Macy's, sell shoes in Macy's. If you want to be an astronaut, be an astronaut.
And yet, we also know at the same time that economic circumstance requires teachers in many parts of the United States, even today, to have second and third jobs.
I know, that's the unfortunate part.
Because they can't make ends meet.
No. That's another hot button for me. If you talk to me about teachers being overpaid, how can they be overpaid? And then you can get on to the athletes in the world, or it's more important to play baseball, and we can pay for that.
Joan, recently there's been a lot of politicking involved, and of course the economics of the of our times is such that a cap has been suggested for superintendent salaries. And while a superintendent doesn't have tenure and can be dismissed
at any time,
there is a great deal of job insecurity in that. However, when you think about superintendents in some parts of the country who make less than the football coach, because football is big in that community. In some school districts on Long Island now, teachers' incomes are up in six figures. And a superintendent or an assistant superintendent certainly has a great deal more on their plate than a classroom teacher does, even if they've been there for 30 years.
It is a longer day. It's not a harder day, a more difficult day. It's a longer day, though.
What's a longer day?
To be in the administrative piece.
Yes.
That's what I think people see. They're concerned because they see teachers have such a shortened day, but they have no idea.
It's a longer day and it's a longer year as well.
Right.
So.
But easier in many respects.
Okay. All right. Not easier, but in some regards, not any less stressful, I think.
Oh, no, it's very stressful.
When looking at deadlines.
Very stressful unless you want to maintain the status quo. And then there's no stress at all. If you are happy with things as they are, and that for me is a frustration.
Yes.
It's been in several districts.
Yes.
Don't be content.
Yes. Yes. Get out of your comfort zone.
Right. Our kids can do amazing things.
Yes. Did you have a favorite year?
No, probably not. I loved every year.
Yeah.
I really think that's why I used to tell everybody the reason I went into administration is because I hated June so much because it meant that I wasn't going to do anything for the summer. It's like, then you have to start all over again.
Yes.
That's the one advantage to administration. You have a plan, you have goals, and you can go for it.
And I think only people who work in education, particularly at the classroom level, would understand that. And the following year, you're a year older.
Right.
But your kids are still the same age.
That's right.
Is there anything that we haven't spoken about or that we wanted to get in here that I didn't ask about or I didn't know about and therefore didn't ask it? That you want to make sure that you get, that we go on record as having.
I'm sure, but it won't occur to me until we finish.
Okay.
And probably you're driving away and I wish I had done
Guaranteed we will both do that. Yes. Thank you very, very much, Joan.
Thank you for the opportunity to think about these wonderful memories.
It has been a pleasure.